Hi everyone, this is Terry from the Tag Collab, Terry Arvisu Gonzalez. And this week I am writing about and talking to you on my podcast about something that came to me, and I sort of hate to admit it, but I was doom scrolling. Um, and I come upon an ad for Lotus seeds. I don't know. My phone must have been listening to me or something, and maybe I said something about it, but I don't really remember. So, anyways, it sort of made me kind of stop and reflect on how this beautiful plant that is has so much symbolism. I mean, if you've ever noticed, you notice that places, companies that want brands that want to exemplify or a see themselves as something that either calm a sell something that is calming or resilience or coaching. A lot of coaching session companies have this or whatever because of its symbolism over history has been really about beauty and strength at the same time, about confidence and resilience. And yet this flower rises not from ideal pristine conditions, but it rises from the mud, from that thing that could have suffocated it, the murky waters. Instead, it uses it as nourishment. And I, I oftentimes see symbolism and these things that one might call coincidence, this ad popping up as many times a sign or a message that God may be sending me. And then I love to share them when they do pop up this way. And so it made me think about a couple of things, which is, when we are in these conditions or and by that, situations, environments that are maybe not the most perfect, how being able to operate in an as is reality in order to thrive even in these conditions is kind of like a mix. And it made me, I'll be honest with you, I came up with what I believe is a bit of a framework that I am now coining the Lotus strategy, which is about thriving in the as is reality, right? This beautiful flower doesn't wait for perfect water to bloom. It rises through the mud. As I mentioned, the very thing that could have suffocated it is the source of its nutrients and its strengths, and it operates and thrives despite imperfect conditions. And I think that there's a lot of one can draw a lot of parallels between life itself and challenging conditions to still use them as opportunities to reframe. And I will walk you through some of my advice on how to thrive even in imperfect conditions, right? There's no doubt that I do believe that reality, right, does ground us. Um, it serves a purpose, but so does idealism and nonconformism in these reality, and a mix and a combination of all help us to, if diagnosed correctly, um, can help us thrive, right? So much of our frustration that happens is comes from unmet expectations. And oftentimes we cannot change the environment, but we can change our expectations. And that in psychology is often called, or in coaching is called reframing. So too often we picture how things should be. It should be like this. And that oftentimes can act as a barrier for us to even act. If you can't overcome that part, then you can't even begin to survive yet thrive. And so but it does, and I want to be clear, reality does paint a purpose, right? It does play a purpose. And so while I am a fan of understanding what is real and what we can, as many times we often ask, what can we control and what can't we control? And that's a very important question to define clearly, absent of, emotions, right, that might cloud our vision. um so is also still not losing hope, and that idealism that also many times plays a part in us being able to challenge norms, being a little bit non-conformist, in order to capitalize even on, sometimes even a crisis, right? They say don't let a crisis go uh, to waste, right? So while, like I mentioned, while I am going to advocate both for realism and challenging norms, questioning assumptions that hold us back, there are certain elements of situations that may not be challengeable, and at least not right now. That's where awareness and discernment can come in. We can transform what we haven't, but we can't first transform what we haven't first diagnosed. And one of the things in leadership training, especially in a theory called situational leadership, was where I learned to what I, some of my favorite words, which is double click and triple click, right? In order to get to the root causes of things and to also see things compartmentalized in order to diagnose and then decide how you're going to act. And I think this also um, is valid in this conversation, right? We oftentimes diagnose full situations as the entire situation is either good or bad, where if you compartmentalize, some parts of this are controllable and not control, these parts are not controllable. Some parts of this require me to be idealistic in order um to 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 succeed, and even a little bit nonconformist in order to innovate. Knowing which parts and how to discern that can actually help you take a situation like the mud and flourish from it instead, right? So diagnosing doesn't mean labeling the entire situation as good and bad. It means compartmentalizing it. Some parts require acceptance and some others invite innovation, nonconformism, and even idealism. The very art of thriving in an as is reality is knowing what to challenge, what to change, and what to embrace. Because should have, would have, or could have, or should be, is not a, it's not a strategy. It can oftentimes be a stall. It keeps us from it keeps us waiting for ideal conditions instead of using the ones we have. It's also an excuse and a clever way to avoid the risk of fear, rejection, or failure by directing our energy towards blame or paralysis. As long as we're wishing for the perfect setup, we never have to test what's possible in the imperfect one. Yet progress happens here. Resilience is built here. Even if success means learning, pivoting, and earning the experience to carry you into the next chapter, growth lives in motion and not in theory. And yet, again, like I said, I am a fan of idealism. I believe in dreaming audaciously. In design thinking and in innovation and in leadership, we need idealism to stretch beyond limits to imagine what doesn't yet exist and solve for pain points that require vision. Idealism, I would say, is the fuel of possibility. Nonconformism is the engine, but reality is the stage and the entry point for all of it. There's a dance between the three, between vision and acceptance, imagination and adjustments. Moments that demand innovation ask us to be idealists. Moments that demand resilience, or parts of a situation that demand resilience, ask us to be realists. And every challenge, setback, or transition invites us to move between them with awareness, discernment, and timing. Knowing when to dream, when to adapt, and when to act, that's strategy. And fighting the temptation to just diagnose an entire situation as one bad or good is robbing you of the opportunity of your own potential and to innovate, to succeed, right? And somewhere in that mix, like I mentioned, having the nonconformist in you oftentimes gives you the courage to look at the mud and say, this isn't the end of the story. I oftentimes give this example with people when I'm trying to make this point is think about, and I am doing this without having studied the history of who invented the umbrella and why, but I thought to myself, somebody in history decided that we needed to accept that it was going to rain, right? It rains. That we're not going to change that. But they got tired, and this is the nonconformist in them, of getting wet. And so the idealist in them decided to create some sort of ideal mechanism to stop getting wet. They didn't try to stop the rain. They didn't pretend that it would stop. They accepted it as the reality that it will rain. And then they might be believed in the ideal, I can do something about it, instead of just saying, like the conformist might say, well, that's just the way it is. It rains. In design thinking, we often use a theory or technique called alternative universe. This is about imagining a world where constraints don't exist, not to escape reality, but to reveal the hidden possibilities within it. And with a spark of nonconformism, the person created a tool, the one in the umbrella, that redefined how humans move through storms. How oftentimes, it's probably one of my biggest pet peeves is, well, that's just the way that it is, right? Like, according to whom does it have to stay like that? According to whom? And what parts is this just an umbrella statement, like, you know, painted with a broad stroke, that we just, the whole situation requires you just to accept it as it is and nothing more. Whereas there are parts of it which we can identify, like I said, and figure out whether we need to ground them in reality, okay, or whether we need to think about them in a nonconformist or idealistic way, and then marry all three together. So here's the sweet spot. I like to think that reality grounds us. It gives us the data, and it oftentimes gives us an entry point, right? We start little by little as opposed to full revolution instead of iteration. Nonconformism makes us audacious and bold enough to see an opportunity, to say, no, this is not how it has to be. And then idealism propels us forward and gives us direction. These three forces, although might seemingly look as though they're at odds, could actually coexist in harmony when we allow them to. When we learn to hold them together, we stop oscillating between hope and hesitation. We stop using perfectionism as a disguise for fear. When we begin to design lives and systems that are both imaginative and adaptive, like, why can't they be both? That's how the lotus thrives. It doesn't deny the mud, it transcends it. In Spanish, there's a saying that says, con, sin, o a pesar de ti, with, without, or despite you. Oftentimes, I add in my own mind is, even when I find individuals or situations that feel like I need to just, accept and that's it, or that feel like they're being blocked, or I'm blocking myself, I say, with, without, or in spite of you. Sometimes that's even myself. In spite of myself, I will thrive. It's not defiance, it's discipline. It's knowing when to surrender, when to imagine, and when to act. So as you move through your moment, right, or your situation, whether it's muddy or it's crystal clear, ask yourself, where do I need to dream bigger? Where do I need to get real? And where do I need to refuse conformity and to design my own umbrella instead of waiting for the rain to stop? For those of you who believe that, you reap what you sow, the energy you emulate is what you're going to attract. By reframing these things in this way is oftentimes also a way to give you back your power, to give you back the positivity, even in a difficult situation. If you had to look for that one thing and then build upon that light, right? What would that be? Even in a terrible situation, will actually create for you an opportunity for growth, for resilience, and even maybe for innovation and things that are maybe even groundbreaking in what seems like a hopeless situation to other people, or a non-perfect situation for people. For you, you can rise above that regardless, and maybe achieve some real, not just survive the situation, but thrive in the situation. Because look, the truth is that the lotus isn't proof that the mud disappeared. It's the proof that you took the situation and you turned it into momentum. So if this spoke to you, I invite you to share it. For those of you who do subscribe to the Substack, the paid version, I will be putting together for you a framework for you to kind of work through some of these things in different situations, questions to ask in order to diagnose whether you should be looking at this part as a realistic lens, through a nonconformist lens, or through an idealistic lens, and how to put it all together. So for this week. That's it. And hope you join me again. Thank you. This is the Tag Collab. Take care.